A ship arriving from China on June 5th had announced that Lord Amherst, British ambassador to China, was soon to arrive in St. Helena. Mr. Mannering was on that ship, the man who had visited Tibet and had seen the Great Lama. Dr. O'Meara had talked to him in town and had told the Emperor of Mr. Mannering's desire to be presented to him. The Emperor wished very much to talk with this traveler, but wanting nothing changed in the system he had adopted of not receiving visits, he was going to deprive himself of this distraction. The Grand Marshal, however, suggested the idea of receiving Mr. Mannering at his home, where the Emperor would arrive as if by chance and find him there. The Emperor took that suggestion and talked to the great scientist. Mr. Mannering said that the Great Lama was an intelligent child, aged about 7 at the time he saw him. Most of his income resulted from the beliefs of the people and the princes in that part of the world. Neither he nor his priests could marry. According to them, they could, through positive science, determine when a spirit transferred from one body to another. If the emperor was satisfied by certain answers to his questions regarding the administrative and topographical aspects of those countries, he was less so with those given him on the subject of religion. Mr. Mannering seized that opportunity to remind the emperor that when he was held prisoner in France after the breach of the Treaty of the Amiens, orders had been given to release him as soon as they learned he was traveling for research valuable to arts and society. When Lord Amherst arrived near the end of June, he asked to be received by the emperor. That ambassador had failed in the mission given him by his government by not submitting to the kowtow. The emperor had learned of that incident in the British newspapers and blamed the ambassador for not having submitted, saying on this occasion that an ambassador was not the sovereign, regardless of what diplomacy dictates. A king never saw his equal in the ambassador of another king, and the latter was only entitled to be treated with the consideration and privileges granted to high-ranking men in that state. By refusing the ceremony of the kowtow, he had lost for his government all the benefits he could have derived from his mission. Lord Amherst received from the emperor the audience that had not been granted to Sir Hudson Lowe at his arrival on the islands. Generals Montholon and Gourgaud remained in the parlor, which was used as the service quarters on these occasions, with the ambassador's retinue, while the Grand Marshal introduced Lord Amherst in the drawing room where the emperor was, and remained with him. Saint-Denis and Novaras remained at the doors to the drawing room and the veranda. If Lord Amherst's reception by the emperor and his officers was marked by consideration for him and his retinue, they, for their part, were equally respectful and courteous in their manners and words. The emperor appeared satisfied with the audience he had just granted. He had found in Lord Amherst as much wit as knowledge. When the ambassador suggested a conciliatory mission with Hudson Lowe, he seized the opportunity to stop him after the first few words and told him all he felt towards this man. He promised to hide nothing from the Prince Regent and respectfully offered his intervention with Hudson Lowe. It would be useless, replied the emperor, interrupting him. Crime and his hatred of me are in that man's nature. He has a need to torture me. He is like a tiger sinking his claws into his prey, whose agony he takes pleasure in prolonging. Tell the Prince Regent, tell the Parliament, of which you are one of the principal members, that I am waiting as a favor for the executioner's hatchet to put an end to my jailer's outrages. The emperor, during this audience, had his hat under his arm. It could be seen that it carried no cockade, as he had told me a few days before to take it away and set it aside. The emperor was about to suffer a loss that would be felt all the more because it would not be replaced. Admiral Malcolm, who so much wished to see the emperor's position made more bearable on this miserable rock, and blamed the excessive severity of the instructions given to the governor, was about to leave St. Helena. He had often offered his services in bringing about a reconciliation between Hudson Lowe and the emperor. Without ever having succeeded, he came to ask to present his successor, Admiral Plampin, who had arrived on the Conqueror. A few days later, General Bingham asked the emperor to allow the officers of the 53rd Regiment who were leaving St. Helena to come and take their leave of him. This regiment was to be replaced by the 66th. On July 2nd, Admiral Malcolm came to introduce his successor, Admiral Plampin. The emperor had learned from Dr. O'Meara that the son of Sir Robert Wilson was on board the Conqueror. he told the admiral to bring him, that he would be very pleased to see the son of the man who had saved the life of one of his best friends. But the audience was short. It gave an indication of the poor relations that were to be established between the emperor and this new admiral, who was polite, cold, and not well disposed towards the emperor. On July 12th, the emperor received the officers' corps of the 53rd. As they entered the drawing room, the officers formed a semicircle, and the emperor spoke to each of them, asking, "How many campaigns? How many wounds? I shall always learn with pleasure of any good fortune encountered by the 53rd, for whom I have only praise." "You must be very sad," he said to General Bingham, "to see so many brave men leave." Captain Poppleton, the duty officer at Longwood, who had always known how to combine his surveillance duty with the attention and consideration due misfortune, received indications of attention and consideration from the emperor. The attitude of the officers' corps was that of regret on leaving St. Helena, at leaving the emperor on this desolate piece of land. We had in the service of our household a few Englishmen belonging to the 53rd. They told us that when they left St. Helena, the entire regiment would have liked to be able to take Napoleon with him and see him live in a fine castle in England. These sentiments did not surprise us. Officers and soldiers had always shown much care and consideration toward him. Those who were in the service of the household received a gratification on leaving and were replaced by a Chinese. General Gourgaud, without being bedridden, had always suffered from great intestinal weakness that never left him, and like all intestinal problems, it generally made him sad. The emperor sought to combat this through work and conversation, reminding the general of his activity on the battlefields and the glory he had acquired there. The emperor, believing that the general might be worried about his future, one day went to talk to him about it in a fatherly way, as the man was forced to stay in bed. The general was concerned about his mother, whom he loved dearly. An hour later, he received an open letter to be sent to France. It was a pension of 12,000 francs for Madame Gourgaud, revertible to her son. General Gourgaud was not the only beneficiary of imperial munificence. General Montholon had left France hurriedly. The emperor, learning indirectly of some financial difficulties he had left there, immediately made a certain sum available to him so that preoccupations of this nature would not disrupt the completely devoted life he had come to offer him. I could record here many similar events in the days of his grandeur toward many people who, when events turned against him, abandoned him. I prefer to keep silent on the names of those who received these magnificent gifts, rather than be forced to record their ingratitude. Among the people who were leaving, General Gourgaud found a way to pass on a letter to Prince Eugene, dictated by the emperor, along with the pension certificate for 12,000 francs that the prince was instructed to make up to Madame Gourgaud out of the funds he held for the emperor. He used the same means to announce to his mother what the emperor was doing for her. It was a happy day for him. The emperor informed that the general had found in the 53rd the means to send her a letter safely, dictated the following letter to him to be sent to Prince Eugene in Munich. "My son, I pray that you open for me a credit of 12,000 francs per month starting in October 1817 with Messrs. Andrew and Parker in London. Write to the banker that Count Bertrand will draw that sum from him every month and that he is to honor it. Here they allow me to lack the most necessary things in life. It is useless for you to write me as long as things remain on this footing." After signing it, the emperor added in his own hand, "Give news of my wife, my mother, and Hortense." The officers of the 66th Regiment requested the honor of being presented to the emperor. This request was granted. The presentation was made with the same ceremony as for the 53rd. They were introduced by the Grand Marshal and presented by General Bingham. After the audience, the emperor invited this high-ranking officer to dine with him, when the general invited the emperor to take his strolls in the direction of Lady Bingham's cottage. The emperor answered that he would go there with pleasure, if it was located within the authorized limits. "See to it that it is, and I shall come and see you often." Longwood had just experienced an existence it had not been accustomed to for some time. It soon returned to its habitual calm. The emperor had again no other distraction in this monotonous life than the news brought back by General Gourgaud from his conversations with the Russian commissioner, or those of Dr. O'Meara with the governor. The latter were caustic and bad-tempered. The emperor would laugh about it, and when he was told about Hudson Lowe's fits of temper, wished that he might someday die of anger. The governor had the doctor tell the emperor that General Bertrand's last letter was the most impertinent he had ever received, and he should remember that General Bertrand remained on the island only because he, Hudson Lowe, permitted it. If he behaved so again, he would be forced to send him immediately to the Cape. He also asked General Bonaparte to let him know who was the author of the infamous slander accusing him of having wanted to break the bust of young Napoleon and of having prevented the gunner on the Bering from selling his goods. The emperor was shaving while listening to the governor's complaints. He stopped suddenly and turned to the doctor and said, "Tell him that it was the gunner himself who told the Grand Marshal that." The doctor also told him that the governor was already worried about the effect that he had on the officers of the 66th after the audience. The latter had not hidden their kind impression toward great misfortune. "I have always told you," replied the emperor, "that this man's behavior is that of the petty tyrants in Italy, whose conduct is always devious and mysterious. Tell him, when he talks to you about me, that he bores me with his insinuations, and that his conduct with regard to the bust of my son is in keeping with all his actions since my arrival." Captain Poppleton had just left us. He was replaced by Captain Blakeney of the 66th, who soon became bored with a duty requiring him to provide a surveillance that went against his character. Knowing this surveillance went as far as coming under his windows to listen to what he was saying, the emperor had told Novaraz to make him 2 gardens parallel to the garden room and the parlor, extending the entire length of the main building. They measured 60 feet in length and were as wide as the building wing, that measured 30 feet. A small wooden fence was placed around each of them, and the sentries were thus distanced that far. Pick and shovel were soon put to task in what had been only a scorched lawn, and the ground was dug deeply enough so that trees or plants could be brought there and could grow easily. Trees that had been dug up with very large earth balls were carefully brought to the house. Although they were far away, they provided the emperor with shade, which he appreciated all the more as he could enjoy it in his robe, whereas previously he had to go some distance from the building in order to shade his head from the strong sun. The most remarkable of our plantings were very handsome twin lemon trees, transplanted as described above and placed facing one another. Their branches formed a high arbor so that 6 people could dine underneath, and the serving was not hindered by them. The emperor often had lunch in that shade and sometimes even dictated there. He liked to make himself invisible to the duty captain. An arbor was built in one of the gardens. Passion plants climbed over it, and within a year covered it in such a way as to make it impenetrable to the rays of the sun. These 2 gardens provided distraction for the emperor, who had a small pump purchased in town and amused himself watering his flowers, while Novaraz and Saint-Denis worked the pump lever. One of the gardens could be reached through the French doors in the dining room, but the one under his bedroom windows did not have any. With the emperor's approval, Count de Montsalon had one of the windows in the second room covered into a French door, allowing the emperor to go from his apartment into either one of the 2 small gardens. They increased the size of his private quarters by that much and provided him pleasures he had not imagined before, such as that of taking an interest in the development of the trees, rose bushes, or flowers before him while strolling with one or another of these gentlemen. These gardens could not have been made a few months earlier, when there was barely enough water for the emperor's bath and for the household. Today, water was not lacking, and the watering they received gave them a freshness that contrasted with the dried-out nature of everything surrounding them. Being a faithful reporter, Dr. O'Meara reported to Longwood his conversations with the governor, and whatever they might be, he lost nothing in the esteem of the emperor, who had always trusted him. Such was not the case when he repeated the emperor's words at Plantation House. The governor flew into rages in which he accused Dr. O'Meara of having sold out the French. He threatened to have him taken to the Cape, bound hand and foot, if he managed to get his hands on his illegal correspondence. Your General Bonaparte pretends to be sick, and he is not. You back up his statements. His complaints against me are infamous lies. He knows it well, but it is a system to substantiate his complaints and interest Europe in his person. He should know that the truth regarding his situation is known, and that I treat him too well. Tell him so." The emperor reassured the doctor regarding the power the governor claimed of being able to take him away from him. If he could do so, he would not take such great care with you. You annoy him enough through your relations with the island inhabitants and the squadron sailors for him to send you away. You may be sure that if Lord Bathurst wants Lowe to kill me, he does not want it said that he killed me with a doctor of his choice, and that the first thing his government recommended to him was not to take you away from me without my consent. Apart from these violent outbursts that Dr. O'Meara caused at Plantation House, General Gourgaud found during his strolls men who sympathized with the emperor's position, assuring him of a better future. Among others, the Russian commissioner received from his court, to which he had written, complete censure of the harassment that the emperor was subjected to. His correspondence even urged him to go to Longwood and take whatever means necessary to make himself welcome there. This news pleased the emperor, but nothing came of it. Count Belman had fallen in love with Mr. Lowe's daughter, a handsome woman to whom he proposed marriage. This alliance was about to take place, and the governor viewed with concern General Gourgaud's encounters with the man who was to become his son-in-law. They became less frequent and less communicative. The other two commissioners would have liked nothing better than to come to Longwood, but it would have meant breaking off relations with the governor. They left the responsibility for the measures to the latter, as it was not part of their instructions. Time, therefore, was spent in illusions conceived on one day to be destroyed the next. The fact is that these gentlemen were not introduced because the emperor did not want to receive them in their official capacity. The following August 15th, on the occasion of his birthday, the emperor received the compliments of these ladies and his officers. It was the third anniversary, which reminded us of the preceding feasts in the days of the empire. Like the previous year, the emperor took pleasure in giving the children presents consisting of double Italian Napoleons, which he had me ask for, and he gave the ladies some chains from China. In the early days of September, races took place at the camp. The governor went there, as did the population of the island. The Allied powers commissioners came there too. By using his battlefield spyglass, the emperor was able to see them from his quarters. But in order to get closer, he went to Count Bertrand's house. Once the races had ended, the commissioners approached the perimeter gate in the hope of seeing the emperor. Madame Sturmer, on horseback, was among them. The Grand Marshal and General Gourgaud went to speak with them without either party asking to cross the gate. Without being seen, the emperor eyed Baroness Sturmer, whom he found attractive and well seated on her horse. It was reported to the emperor that Sir Hudson Lowe, having noticed the commissioners headed for Longwood, had gone home furious, imagining there was going to be communication between them and the emperor in a fortuitous manner without official presentation.